So I just got done watching a video by Blaire White, and for those that don't know who Blaire White is a person that was born male and transitioned to a female, and is a really popular YouTube conservative, which is a rare job description. But anyways, I'm actually on my way to the airport to go see my wife's family for Thanksgiving, so I gotta make this short and sweet. So in the video, Blaire talks about how she really wants children, and she's only 25 now, but she really wants children bad. And so she is now in the process of detransitioning, so that way she can see if there's still sperm left, so that way she can use her sperm for artificial insemination. She also talked about in the video how at 22, she started her transitioning process, and at that time, she wasn't thinking at all about having children or anything like that. So now that she's 25 and getting older and is engaged and wants to have a family, she's now in the process of detransitioning so that way she can have kids. She said how her father's deceased and her uncle's gay, so she's the last one in the family that can pass on the genetics. Now, Blaire is an extremely rare case because she's extremely conservative, she's pretty intelligent, and she's also against a lot of the liberal thoughts and views today. Now, I already know whenever this topic is brought up, emotions are bound to flare, especially if you have somebody that's in your family that's transgender. You might feel extremely sensitive to this issue. And what we're going to talk about today, really briefly, is going to be when it comes to parenting, what do we do when we have transgender children? Now, when it comes to a topic that has this much emotion involved, the only thing I ask is that you at least try to keep an open mind. Now, this is important because it's got to be clear that this video is not about the acceptance of transgenders or transgender children. Now, if there's one thing that we can all agree on, I hope it's that we agree that adults and children that suffer from some sort of gender dysphoria are treated no differently than every other human being. And of course, I expect that we'll love and value them just as we would anybody else. So the question in this video is not a matter of acceptance, but instead what's best for the child. Now, the reason why people are so polarized on this view is because one of the reasons why people are in support of the parents making the decision to have the child transition is based off of empathy. At this point, I want to caution that we don't make critical and life-changing decisions based off of empathy unless the empathy is based off of a foundation of what is best for the child. If empathy is not based on what's best for the person, then empathy can actually lead us to make the wrong decisions, and those can have serious consequences. For example, so everybody knows that I have a 4-year-old and I have a 3-month-old. Now, my 4-year-old is at that age where he doesn't like veggies, instead he wants ice cream for dinner. Now, I definitely empathize with that because I too like ice cream more than I like vegetables, but if I was going to make the decision based off of empathy, it wouldn't be necessarily good for his health in the long run. And notice what's going on here. I'm not going to allow him to eat ice cream for dinner every night because it would make me feel better, because he'll like me more and that sort of thing. But instead, I want to do what's best for him in the long run because I genuinely love and care about him very much. So in the long run, because I care about him, I want to do what's best for him, so I go against his desires. Now, I imagine that a lot of parents that have children who suffer from gender dysphoria are in a similar position. They want to do what's best for their children. Now, the question is, what is best for the child? So at this point, now that we all agree, I hope that we've established that we don't want to do what's best for the child or what the child wants to do in the short term, but instead we want to do what's best for the child in the long term. So the question is transitioning what is best for the child? Now, if you've been following this debate for a while, I'm sure that you heard that it's been said that about 80% of children who didn't believe that their gender matched their biological sex eventually grew up to be gay, straight, or bisexual, which means that they're no longer transgender. Instead, they identify as one of the 3 things I just listed. Now, just recently, there was a boy in Australia who started transitioning from a boy to a girl at the age of 12. And about 2 years after his transitioning process, he realized that he was actually quite comfortable in his body and is now in the process of detransitioning back to being male. And the last I heard, he was actually undergoing surgery to remove his female parts. Now, I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the description for those who want to learn more about his story. Blaire is also another example. In the video, she warns this.
But I will say this also reaffirms my position that people need to be very careful with allowing very, very young children to transition, because if I at 22 was not thinking about the fact that I would maybe someday want kids, a 12, 13, 14 or younger year old is definitely not. So just keep that in mind. Like, I personally feel, and not everyone wants kids, and that's totally fine, but I personally feel like that is where I see my life headed. That is one of the biggest goals, if not the biggest goal of my life. You know, I transitioned to live a normal life, not to live this life of just, I transitioned and now I'm just working and out here for myself for the rest of my life. I transitioned to have a family, to have a husband, to have kids. You know, if I had started 14, 15, 16, there would just be no way. You know, I don't want to polarize people in this video, but I also just want you guys to be aware that that is a reality. And so people, please be very, very careful about these very, very young kids transitioning, because if I wasn't thinking about a family at 22 and, you know, whether or not I wanted to have kids, these 14, 15 and younger year olds are definitely not. And I don't want to get super polarizing in this video. I've done a million videos about kids transitioning, but I'm just being real. This is just the reality of the situation, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Now, it's also worth noting that science confirms that your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for your mature decision making, isn't fully developed until your 20s. But given these facts, if we require someone to be 18 years of age before they can get a tattoo for the fear that they'll get older and regret it, then how much more cautious should we be when it comes to changing your entire gender? Now, the law against tattoos is not born out of hate or just because they simply want to stop people from expressing themselves. The law is actually in place to protect people from making the wrong decisions while they're younger, so that way they don't regret and want to change the decisions as they get older. We also have laws in place for things like statutory rape, which implies that the younger people are, they're not capable of making mature sexual decisions. Now, I want to empathize that certainly a lot of these parents have well-meaning and good intentions. So the conclusion that I hope people draw is not that these parents have some ill motives of some sort. I don't think that's the case at all. I'd be willing to bet that most of us share my same heart in wanting what's best for the child, although we may disagree on what actually is best for the child. And if there's something that I hope we can all agree on, it's that if transitioning is actually harmful for the child, then we all should agree that that's not the right way to go and we should explore other options. And we should be open to other options if our agenda is actually what's best for the child and not simply pushing and furthering our political agendas. So next time you have this conversation with somebody and you're trying to explain to them that you only want what's best for the child, what are you going to say? What do you mean?